Good afternoon. Thank you. I hope we can do justice to this beautiful movie. I'm going to wait for the first slide to come up. So before we start, I'd also like to give credits to Bharat Sarvia, who's an artist and director, who has been a part of this trio on Jugalbandi that we're here for. The idea was to explore the city as a theater, where the urban environment is a dynamic stage where life really unfolds, and how we as architects and planners are actually curators and facilitators of this grand drama. The city is a theater of human events. Architecture's history lies in its material, and it is this materiality which becomes the object of analysis. Monuments are persistent urban artifacts. Aldo Rossi, Italian architect and theorist, known for his influential writings on urban design and architecture, said this famously. The city as theater is no longer just a representation. It absorbs events, feelings, and memories. Each new event carries the past while shaping the future. Does the practice of this needs to play. So does the practice of architecture today accommodate this understanding of the city?
Well, architecture should not just perform, it also has to emote. And historically, cities were not just economic drivers, they were not just economic centers. They were also, the preservers of culture. And unfortunately, in today's planning, what drives our cities is just an understanding of economics, because that's what development has been for the last 25 years, and understanding of waste management and energy consumption.
And as architects and designers, we really must investigate how reality and the narrative interact. Our role is to create spaces where human life unfolds, and that's the stage for emotion and commotion. Are we urban curators? In Exeter City, Nigel Coates, who's a British architect and designer, who's known for his work in urban design and his concept of Exeter City, which explores the emotional and experiential dimension of cities. He says there is a constant trade between architecture and experience. Form follows function, gives way to form, follows fiction. Design is a process of collecting, dismantling, sifting, and responding. It weaves together the everyday with the hybrid and with the iconic, matching the nature of urban experience. How do you interpret the shift from form follows function to form follows fiction in modern architecture? How do we balance this trait between architecture and experience?
I think one of the most misunderstood ideas of or understanding the modern architecture, and I mean modernist architecture, was that it could not house human life as it moved through time and space. And people wanted to soften it up. But what we have to realize is that every piece of architecture is not just a neutral shell. It's, the objective of architecture has to be to create a stage for memory and experiences. And of course, for people to create a future for themselves. And it's always easy to take on a traditionalist, to approach architecture from a return to traditionalist and traditional technique perspective. But if you start creating architecture like you're creating a shell, you're probably doing people more of a service than you are the profession of architecture.
And is that the design of discipline? Just like a playwright hones their craft to evoke emotion and convey a message through the scene, architects must refine today their design language to create spaces that resonate deeply with those who actually inhabit them. This continuous process of crafting and recrafting the urban environment ensures that cities are not just built, but thoughtfully performed, inviting engagement at every moment and at every turn. As designers, how do we learn to achieve this?
So through the founding blocks of architecture and making, technology is universal, and it's you can count back in time to when the brick was actually invented. But technique is a deeply personal trait. It's how you use a technology that makes technique, and that's what makes a work of architecture expressive. Now, this unfortunately in our time, technique through the corporatization of architecture, I think it's often ignored, and we start creating volumes through material, but we don't want to do things that move the soul. I think the objective of architecture has to be to create something that creates space for the mind.
And when we talk about technique, we also must recognize, and especially over the last 24 hours, and see that how architecture actually exists in resonance with art forms such as film, such as music, and so much more. Akshat, you're also a musician, along with being an architect. What impact does music have on your creative process?
Well, I started as a musician that plays progressive metal, and that's generally seen as noise for most people. But I think metal is maybe the most demanding form of music. It's the most demanding music to perform, and how it resonates with architecture, for me, and that's an understanding that I've come to recently, is that it's also honest, and structured and incredibly bare-boned. When you're there performing on stage, or when you're with your instrument, that's all you have. You have no place to hide, you have nothing else to do. And that, I think, forms a strong basis for how we practice architecture in the studio.
And the silence between the notes is as important as the notes itself. Vikram Seth very famously said in the book Unequal Music, which reflects on the interplay between music and life. Does this idea reflect in your practice too?
Yeah, it's the space in between, right? So we can start creating islands of excellence, which we do, and we've done them fairly well for the last 50 years. But we've always ignored the space in between. For a building, is just an object. It interacts with people more often than not when it touches the ground. So it's how you address the ground, and then how you address the visual connection from the street, which is how you touch the sky. And I think a building gives to the city from the top, and it gives to people within the city from in between. And both of these are addressals. And these addressals have to happen, maybe without a boundary wall. I think in India we celebrate the boundary wall a bit too much.
Concluding and looking towards the foreseeable future. Classic film Metropolis explores societal structure through towering cityscapes, dividing the elite and the working classes. The film shows how architecture reflects power dynamics and the balance between technological advancement and human oppression. If our cities are an expression of societal structures, how do we redesign them for the future? What will the cities of future look like?
Well, our cities have failed, and there's a really small matrix I read the other day where, if you were to calculate, you would see that 89 of the 90 most polluted cities in the world are in India itself. And they fail at the level of, not just air pollution, but everything, right? Traffic management, built form. There is no real emotional cue in our built environment. And I think if we have to make our cities as catalysts for change, we have to understand that our cities have to start looking like cities of the future. And that cannot have preconceived notions. They have to be built egalitarian. There has to be a sense of generosity and respect for the haves and the have-nots. It's not, and that also extends to the profession of architecture. I think we're building largely for the haves. We're not really building for the ones that really need us.
In shaping cities today, we're shaping the drama of life, creating spaces where there is emotion and action and connections that unfold. The city is a theater where architecture is not just the backdrop, but a central player. Are we as architects today ready to shape the drama and set the stage for the future? Thank you.
Thank you.